It started as a whisper, one of those quiet, uneasy truths that no one in Hollywood dared to speak out loud. Yet Lee Marvin, the tough-as-nails icon of classic cinema, carried it with him for decades. And when he finally opened up, the revelation shook everything fans thought they knew about Cary Grant, the charming gentleman of the silver screen. What Marvin exposed wasn't a scandal in the usual sense. It was deeper, stranger, and far more human. A truth that peeled back the polished veneer of Golden Age Hollywood and revealed the shadows hiding underneath. Lee Marvin never liked talking about the incident. In interviews, whenever Cary Grant's name came up, Marvin's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. A tightening of the jaw, a flicker in his eyes. It was the look of a man torn between respect and something unresolved, something haunting. He once hinted, Cary wasn't always what people believed, but he never said more. Not then. Not when the studios still controlled every headline. Not when careers could be destroyed with a single rumor. Instead, he buried the truth beneath years of silence, even as the memory gnawed at him. To understand why Marvin hesitated for so long, you have to picture the Hollywood of that era. Slick, glamorous, and unforgiving. Stars weren't just actors. They were brands, controlled, marketed, protected by powerful studios that could turn angels into villains and villains into legends. Cary Grant was their crown jewel. Handsome, elegant, and adored, he had an image so spotless it almost seemed supernatural. Everyone knew him as the man who never cracked, never faltered, never showed a single flaw. But Marvin saw something else, something the world wasn't ready to hear. Their encounter didn't happen on a film set or at some glitzy red carpet premiere. It happened in private, away from the spotlight, during one of the most turbulent moments of Grant's life. A moment when the charming facade slipped, revealing a man far more complicated than anyone imagined. Marvin walked in on something he was never meant to witness, something that changed the way he viewed Grant forever. And it wasn't anger that etched itself into Marvin's memory. It was fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. Marvin once suggested the moment felt like seeing a stranger wearing Cary's face. Something fragile. Something broken. Something that didn't match the myth. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because in that era, vulnerability was a sin for a leading man. You could be brilliant. You could be troubled. But you could never, ever be seen as fragile. That was the one thing the studios could not allow. The truth Marvin carried wasn't just a secret about Grant. It was a secret about Hollywood's obsession with control, image, and illusion. And when he finally dared to share it, long after the golden age had begun to fade, it forced fans to question everything they believed about their idols. Cary Grant was the man every woman dreamed of and every man envied. On screen, he moved with impossible elegance. Every smile rehearsed by life itself. Every word delivered like silk wrapped in confidence. But Lee Marvin, a man who never bought into Hollywood illusions, always sensed something beneath that flawless exterior. And when he finally spoke about it, he described a version of Grant that few could imagine. A version that didn't fit the tuxedos, the witty one-liners, or the effortless charm. A version that Grant himself tried desperately to keep hidden. Marvin said it started with the small things, the moments fans never saw. Cary watched people, Marvin once hinted. Not the way an actor does, but the way someone does when they're trying to survive. That one sentence betrayed a truth Marvin had carried for years. Behind the glamour, Cary Grant was a man haunted by something deeper than fame's demands. And Marvin was one of the few who caught a glimpse of it up close. The two men had vastly different reputations. Marvin was rugged, blunt, and unfiltered. Grant was polished, graceful, almost unreal in his perfection. Yet Marvin insisted that Grant's charm wasn't a natural gift. It was armor. Armor forged in childhood trauma, studio pressure, and a lifetime spent pretending to be the persona the world adored. Behind closed doors, Grant was quieter, more fragile, a man who carried his past like a weight chained to his chest. Marvin described a telling moment at a private Hollywood gathering. While everyone else mingled, laughed, and posed for the invisible cameras, Grant stood alone for a fleeting second, his smile fading the moment the room stopped watching. Marvin saw a different face then, a face stripped of performance. One marked with exhaustion, with sadness, with something that looked a lot like fear. It vanished in an instant when someone called his name, replaced by the familiar charismatic grin. But for Marvin, that split-second crack in Grant's armor was unforgettable. The truth was, Grant's life off camera was far more complex than anyone realized. His marriages were turbulent. His friendships were selective. And his inner circle was tiny, not because he was arrogant, but because he didn't trust the world with who he really was. The studios fueled the myth. America's gentleman. Hollywood's perfect man. But perfection is a prison, and Grant lived inside it longer than most. Marvin also hinted at something darker, something Grant struggled with behind closed doors. He never fully detailed it, but he referred to Grant's battles with the shadows, a phrase that left interviewers puzzled but fans intrigued. Was it anxiety, depression, addiction, a secret from his past? Marvin never clarified, but he made it clear. Cary Grant was fighting something the world never saw. And it was that unseen struggle, the one hidden behind Hollywood's brightest smile, that Marvin believed shaped every part of Grant's life. A truth that would collide with Marvin's own path in a moment he could never forget. It happened on a night Lee Marvin never forgot. A night he refused to talk about for decades, because every detail felt like opening a door he'd spent years trying to close. Marvin wasn't the type to rattle easily. He'd been a Marine. He'd survived war, bar fights, and the brutal Hollywood machine. But what he saw that night, what Cary Grant revealed when no one was supposed to be watching, left Marvin shaken in a way no battlefield ever had. The encounter wasn't planned. Marvin had stopped by a private residence in the hills, a quiet place frequented by a handful of trusted Hollywood insiders. Grant was supposed to be out. The lights were low. The house seemed empty. Marvin was simply dropping something off, a favor for a mutual friend. But the moment he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. The atmosphere was heavy, like the air before a storm. And then he heard it, Grant's voice, but not the voice the world knew. Not the smooth, polished cadence that charmed millions. It was trembling, cracked, almost pleading. Marvin followed the sound, uneasy. The closer he got, the more he realized Grant wasn't alone. Not physically, and not mentally. The man Marvin found in that dimly lit room wasn't Cary Grant, Hollywood icon. It was Archie Leach, the name Grant left behind when he reinvented himself. The real man, the terrified man, the man drowning in something he'd been running from his entire life. Grant was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, shaking. His hands covered his face, and he whispered the same words over and over, words Marvin later described as a confession, a memory, and a warning all at once. Marvin never repeated those words publicly, but what he did reveal was enough to paint the picture. Grant was in the middle of a breakdown, a complete collapse of the persona he'd built for decades. The charm was gone. The elegance was gone. All that remained was a man trapped between expectation and reality, crushed by both. Marvin didn't approach at first. He just stood there, stunned. Because seeing Cary Grant, the Cary Grant, like that was like seeing a statue crumble, a symbol shatter. Marvin had seen pain before. He'd seen men break in war. But this was different. This was someone being crushed from the inside out. When Grant finally looked up, his eyes were filled with something Marvin would describe only as pure panic. He didn't seem embarrassed, or angry, or defensive. He seemed exposed, like someone whose deepest secret had just been witnessed by the wrong person. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and that moment hung between them for the rest of their lives. Grant begged Marvin not to tell anyone, not the studios, not their friends, not the press. Marvin promised, and he kept that promise for decades, because he understood in that instant that what he'd seen wasn't weakness. It was the cost of living behind a mask for too long. But that night changed everything. Their relationship, Marvin's view of fame, his understanding of the darkness that lived behind Hollywood's brightest lights. And it planted a truth in his mind, one he would not speak out loud until he was much older, long after Grant was gone and the world was finally ready to confront the reality behind its greatest illusion. For years, people wondered why Lee Marvin, never one to hold back, never one to sugarcoat, refused to speak openly about Cary Grant. Hollywood insiders pushed him. Biographers begged him. Interviewers tried every trick in the book to get him to break. But Marvin didn't budge. Every time Grant's name came up, he dodged, deflected, changed the subject with that gruff, knowing half-smile. And for decades, the story of that night stayed buried behind Marvin's silence. What kept him quiet wasn't fear of scandal. It was something far more personal. Marvin understood what he saw wasn't gossip. It wasn't something to turn into headlines or rumors. It was the raw truth of a man who spent his entire life pretending to be someone the world demanded instead of who he really was. Marvin respected that pain. He recognized it, and in a strange way, he felt responsible for protecting it. The Hollywood of that era wasn't a place where vulnerability was allowed, especially not for men like Cary Grant, leading men who were expected to be larger than life, flawless, unbreakable. If word had gotten out about Grant's breakdown, it wouldn't have generated sympathy. It would have destroyed him. Studios would have panicked. Contracts canceled. Rumors multiplied. A single moment of humanity could erase an entire career. Marvin knew that, and it haunted him. He once told a friend, "Some truths aren't mine to tell." Those words became the shield he used every time someone pushed too hard. Marvin wasn't afraid of anyone. Not producers, not directors, not the press. But he was afraid of betraying a man who, for one unguarded moment, let his real self slip through the cracks. And Marvin carried another fear, one he rarely admitted even to those closest to him. What he saw in Grant that night reminded him of something within himself. Marvin had his own demons, his own battles with trauma, his own moments when the world's expectations felt heavier than his own skin. Seeing Grant break wasn't just witnessing another man's pain. It was witnessing a mirror he didn't want to look into. For decades, Marvin kept the story locked away. He moved on with his career. He built his legacy. He hardened his edges even further. But the memory of Grant on the floor, trembling under the weight of the world, never left him. It dug into him. It resurfaced in quiet moments. It lingered in his thoughts during interviews where he had to pretend that nothing unusual had ever happened. It wasn't until Marvin reached the later years of his life, when Hollywood no longer controlled him, when secrets had lost their power, when age stripped away the need for toughness, that he finally spoke. Not to shame Cary Grant, not to expose him, but to humanize him. Marvin wanted people to understand that the man they worshipped wasn't a flawless symbol. He was human, fragile, hurt, and brilliant in spite of it all. When Marvin finally told the truth, he wasn't revealing a scandal. He was revealing compassion. He was giving Grant something the studios never allowed him during his lifetime, the permission to be real. And that act, more than the secret itself, is what shook Hollywood the most. When Lee Marvin finally revealed the truth, he didn't do it with fanfare. There were no dramatic press conferences, no sensational headlines orchestrated by tabloids. It came quietly, almost reluctantly, during an intimate interview near the end of his life. The interviewer asked a simple question about Cary Grant, expecting the usual polite praise or a Hollywood anecdote. Instead, Marvin paused. A long, heavy pause. And then, for the first time, he let the truth slip through the cracks he'd held shut for decades. He didn't describe the breakdown in detail. He didn't exploit the pain he'd witnessed. Instead, Marvin spoke about the weight of being Cary Grant, truly being Cary Grant. He talked about the crushing expectations, the carefully sculpted image, the suffocating fear of imperfection. He talked about the night he saw the real man behind the myth, a man wrestling with a lifetime of hidden trauma, loneliness, and internal battles the world never suspected. And then Marvin said the line that stunned everyone who heard it. Cary Grant wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying not to disappear. That one sentence shattered the golden veneer Hollywood had built around its most iconic gentleman. Fans who had adored Grant for his charm and grace suddenly saw him differently, not as the unreachable ideal of masculinity, but as a man who spent his entire life pretending to be what others needed him to be. A man whose every smile was a shield, whose every witty remark hid years of unresolved fear. Marvin's revelation didn't tarnish Grant's legacy. It deepened it. It humanized him in a way no studio biography ever dared. Hollywood reacted with disbelief at first. How could someone like Cary Grant, confident, elegant, always composed, have been struggling so deeply? But those who knew him, truly knew him, nodded quietly when Marvin's words reached them. They'd seen glimpses too, the private insecurities, the restless nights, the fleeting moments when Grant's facade slipped just long enough to reveal the burden he carried. Marvin was the first to say it out loud, but he wasn't the only one who knew. For fans, the revelation was heartbreaking, but it also sparked a wave of compassion. People began reassessing Grant's films with new eyes. Suddenly, his performances carried a different weight. The charm looked like survival. The elegance looked like armor. The comedy looked like a mask hiding something much deeper. Marvin didn't expose a weakness. He exposed the strength it took for Grant to keep going. And in the end, that was the real truth Marvin wanted the world to understand. The secret wasn't that Cary Grant had broken down one night. The real secret was that Hollywood's brightest star had been fighting for his own sense of self every single day, long before fame, fortune, or adoration ever entered the picture. Marvin's revelation didn't destroy a legacy, transformed it. It allowed fans to love Cary Grant not as a perfect icon, but as a human being, flawed, vulnerable, and courageous in ways no script could ever capture. And maybe that's why Marvin waited until the world was ready. Because sometimes, the darkest truths aren't meant to tear someone down, they're meant to finally set them free. Lee Marvin never intended to become the guardian of one of Hollywood's most delicate truths. But when he finally spoke, when he finally let the world see the man behind Cary Grant's immaculate mask, it reshaped everything fans believed about the Golden Age's most charming icon. This is the story Marvin protected for decades. The story he carried like a weight. The story Hollywood hoped would never get out. It began with Marvin noticing something subtle about Grant, something the cameras never captured. Grant's charm wasn't effortless. It wasn't natural magic. It was armor. Armor forged from childhood trauma, studio expectations, and a lifetime spent pretending to be perfect. In public, Grant dazzled with elegance and wit, but Marvin saw the cracks. The quiet moments when Grant watched people not like a star soaking up admiration, but like a man trying to survive another day behind a mask too heavy to bear. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Marvin was blunt, rugged, a man who spoke his mind without fear. Grant was polished, graceful, and impossibly controlled. Yet Marvin sensed that beneath Grant's smooth exterior lived a fragile core, one built on fear, pressure, and secrets kept for far too long. All of it came crashing into focus one night. Marvin stopped by a private residence in the Hollywood Hills, expecting an empty house. But what he found instead was a moment he'd never forget. Cary Grant, America's gentleman, Hollywood's most charming illusion, sat trembling on the floor. His hands covered his face. His voice broke in a way Marvin had never heard. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a scene. It was Archie Leach, the man Grant once was before fame demanded he become someone else. Grant begged him not to tell anyone. Not the studios. Not their friends. Not the world. And Marvin promised. Because what he saw wasn't scandal. It was pain. A lifetime of fear compressed into one unguarded moment. Marvin realized that exposing the truth would have destroyed Grant in an era where vulnerability was forbidden, where leading men were expected to be invincible. So he stayed silent. For decades. And as the years passed, Marvin realized something even more unsettling. Grant's collapse reminded him of himself. The pressure. The trauma. The masks men are forced to wear. Marvin knew the weight of hidden demons, and that made Grant's secret feel like his own. It wasn't until Marvin reached his later years, when the studios no longer owned his voice and time had stripped away the fear, that he finally spoke. Not to shame Cary Grant, not to sensationalize him, but to humanize him. To remind the world that the man they worshipped wasn't a flawless icon but a human being fighting battles no one ever saw. Marvin didn't expose details. He didn't pry open the wound. He simply said the line that shook Hollywood. Cary Grant wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying not to disappear. That single sentence transformed everything. It reframed Grant's charm as survival, his elegance as armor, his wit as a mask shielding a fragile soul who feared the world wouldn't love the real him. And the world responded with something unexpected: empathy. Fans didn't turn away. They leaned closer. They revisited Grant's films, searching his eyes for the man Marvin described, for the fear behind the smile, for the loneliness beneath the elegance, for the truth no studio ever dared let slip. In the end, Marvin's revelation didn't tarnish Cary Grant's legacy. It deepened it. It allowed fans to see him not as a myth but as a man who struggled, a man who fought, a man who survived. Lee Marvin didn't reveal a scandal. He revealed a soul. And maybe that's why he waited. Because some truths aren't meant to destroy legacies. They're meant to finally set them free.